Imagine standing at the edge of death, not to be punished, but to be revealed. In ancient cultures, the concept of hell was not always fire and torment. It was something more subtle, more psychological. It was a mirror held up to the soul, not a courtroom, but a weighing scale. In ancient Egypt, the duat was the underworld, and the heart of the deceased was placed on a scale against a single feather, the feather of Mdot, goddess of truth and justice. The heart, symbolizing the essence of one's inner life, was not judged by law, but by weight, the emotional weight of guilt, deceit, and regret. If it was heavier than the feather, it was consumed by Amit, the devourer. The soul would vanish, never to awaken. Here, hell was not eternal fire, but annihilation, the consequence of a life lived out of alignment with inner truth. In ancient Greece, Hades was not a place of fire or fury. It was a grey, listless realm where souls drifted like shadows unseen, untouched, unfulfilled. There was no judgment, no reward, no damnation. Only a kind of eternal numbness, a spiritual amnesia. It reflected the idea that the absence of purpose, of self-knowing, was its own kind of hell. This was not punishment from a god, but the soul's fading from itself. Even in the Hebrew Bible, Sheol, the land of the dead, was described not as a fiery pit, but as a quiet, shadowy place. A realm of silence, of forgetting. There was no heaven, no hell, only the end of meaning. It was not the wrath of God that one feared, but the absence of all relationship, all light. Across these cultures, a deeper theme emerges. Hell is not merely a divine punishment, but a symbolic representation of inner disconnection. It is not about demons torturing sinners, but about what happens when we lose our relationship with the self, when we betray our own heart, deny our purpose, or become numb to our soul's longing. These ancient myths whisper something modern psychology echoes today, that the deepest suffering is not physical pain, but existential void. That the greatest punishment is not fire, but forgetting who you are. Hell begins not beneath the ground, but within, in the spaces where we abandon ourselves. As ancient myths gave way to organized doctrine, the underworld began to change shape, not just in geography, but in meaning. In the New Testament and medieval Christian cosmology, hell became fire, literal, eternal, populated by demons, ruled by Satan, a landscape of endless punishment. But behind the fire and sulfur lay something deeper, a psychological architecture. What was once a shadowy absence like the Greek Hades became an inferno of consequence. The poet John Milton, in Paradise Lost, captured this turning point. His Lucifer is not just the enemy of God, but the tragic mirror of humanity. Proud, wounded, introspective, he utters one of the most haunting lines in Western literature. The mind is its own place, and in itself can make a heaven of hell, a hell of heaven. This is no longer theology, it's psychology. Long before Jung, Milton intuited a truth about the human soul. Hell is not always elsewhere, it is within. A state of being where despair replaces meaning, where the ego revolts against the light and turns inward in self-destruction. Lucifer, in Milton's vision, is not just a villain. He is the prototype of the fragmented psyche, split by pride, inflamed by loss, addicted to control. His fall is not merely a punishment, it's a descent into alienation, a refusal to serve anything higher than the self. And in that refusal, we see the first modern glimpse of psychological hell, the collapse of inner coherence. Carl Jung would later echo this, in different language. He wrote that hell is the place where one meets the shadow, the disowned parts of the self that have been repressed, denied, and demonized. In this light, hell is not a destination after death, but a psychic event during life. A confrontation with what we fear most about ourselves. And perhaps this is what makes the concept of hell so enduring. It evolves. From the moral weight of a feather in Egypt, to the grey nothingness of Hades, to the torment of flame, and finally, to the mind itself, because the true terror is not in the demons or the fire, but in losing connection to one's own soul, in forgetting who we are beneath the masks, in turning away from what is real, and thus becoming unreal. So when we speak of hell now not as superstition, but as symbol, we are speaking of a condition all too familiar, a mind at war with itself, a heart that no longer hopes, a life that's been emptied of meaning. But as Dante, Jung, and so many others remind us, this descent is not the end. It is only the threshold. The question now is not what is hell, but rather what might lie beyond it. Dante's Divine Comedy is not merely a medieval cosmology, it is an archetypal map of the soul's return to wholeness. Beneath its theological layers lies a psychological pilgrimage, mirroring what Carl Jung would later call the process of individuation, the journey toward becoming an integrated self. We begin, as Dante did, lost in a dark wood. The straight path is gone. This is not just a physical disorientation, but a spiritual amnesia. Midway through life, the soul realizes it has wandered far from what is true, pulled by impulses, distractions, and the seduction of masks it thought were its identity. This moment of awakening, the crisis of meaning, marks the first descent into the inner inferno. In Dante's hell, each circle reveals not merely the sins of others, but the symbolic distortions within the self. Pride, envy, wrath, they are not abstract flaws, but energies misdirected, denied, or indulged without awareness. Jung would call this the confrontation with the shadow, the disowned parts of our psyche. These realms are not for judgment, but for recognition, to see clearly what we've become and how far we've drifted from the divine within. But the journey does not end in darkness, it moves upward into purgatory. Here, unlike the condemned souls of hell, the spirits are in motion. They carry their burdens, but they do so with hope. This is the work of psychological purification. The individual, having faced their darkness, now actively labors to release it. Through conscious effort, symbolic suffering becomes transformation. Jung called this the painful but necessary moral effort of individuation, the part where awareness becomes responsibility. And then, beyond the fire, paradise, but not the naive heaven of reward. This is the realm of integration. Dante is led by Beatrice, not just a woman, but the anima, the inner feminine, the soul's bridge to the divine. Here, reason Virgil surrenders to love. The self, having survived fragmentation, now tastes unity. Dante beholds the love that moves the sun and the other stars, the divine order he had once forgotten. Jung's insight is unmistakable. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Dante's journey is precisely that. Not escapism, but descent, not redemption through avoidance, but through illumined confrontation. Each of us must pass through our personal infernos, purge our illusions, and rediscover our soul's North Star. Heaven is not a place, it is a psychological state. And no one ascends without first walking the long, winding road through their own inner hell. In You We Close No Exit, Jean-Paul Sartre delivers one of the most unsettling revelations of modern existential thought. Hell is other people. At first glance, it sounds like misanthropy. But look deeper, this is not a condemnation of human connection. It is a psychological awakening to the tyranny of the gaze. In the play, three souls are locked in a room, no fire, no tormentors, no demons, just mirrors in the form of one another. They quickly discover that their real punishment is being seen, endlessly, by eyes that reduce them to fixed roles. There is no escape. They become who the other believes them to be. Their identities dissolve into expectation. Their essence, held hostage by perception. This is psychological imprisonment in its purest form, not bars or chains, but the invisible walls of social persona. We begin to live not as ourselves, but as the echo of someone else's judgment. This is the hell Sartre speaks of, a life lived outside in. Carl Jung warned of this too. When the persona, the social mask we wear, becomes our truth, we lose the thread to our authentic self. The gaze of the other creates a double bind, conform or be rejected, perform or be erased. The more we are seen, the less we are known, and in that dissonance, we fracture. This is not just theatre, it is the lived reality of modern life. Social media, workplace performance, cultural norms, they all intensify the external gaze. We curate, filter, present. But each layer of presentation becomes a layer of concealment. We hide in plain sight. And the more we are applauded for the mask, the more estranged we become from the soul beneath it. The hell Sartre describes is not distant, it is subtle, psychological, present. It is the unease you feel when you say what's expected, not what's true. It's the fatigue of performing in a script you didn't write. It's the loneliness of being surrounded, yet never seen. But what if, as Jung suggested, hell is also initiation? A confrontation with false identity, designed to awaken the longing for something real. When we recognize that the masks are not who we are, that the gaze is not a mirror, but a prison, we begin the return. To escape Sartre's hell is not to destroy relationship. It is to reclaim inner freedom within relationship. It is to meet the gaze of the other without becoming it. It is to finally say, I see you, but I no longer abandon myself to be seen. That is the beginning of soul sovereignty. That is the real liberation. In the Red Book, Carl Jung did not journey into some mythic afterlife, he descended into the underworld of his own psyche. For Jung, hell was not a destination beyond death, but a symbolic terrain within the unconscious, a realm where forgotten truths and forbidden emotions dwell in silence, waiting. There, he met the Red One, not a devil in the religious sense, but an archetype. A face of the shadow, the disowned self. This figure was wild, irreverent, almost joyful in his transgression. And yet, Jung didn't banish him. He listened, he dialogued. He danced with what most would run from. In this encounter, Jung discovered what modern psychology is only beginning to understand. The shadow is not the enemy, it is the initiation. To descend into that inner hell is to face the parts of ourselves we repress, our rage, our desire, our grief, our contradictions. It is a process not of judgment, but of integration. But here lies the paradox. In order to heal, the ego must fracture. The carefully constructed self, the persona, the identity we cling to, must be stripped away. This is the dark night of the soul, not because God has abandoned us, but because we are finally confronting the God within whom we've denied. Jung wrote that one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious, and this, truly, is the psychological function of hell. Not to punish, but to reveal, to burn away illusion, so that a deeper authenticity may emerge. Through this descent, Jung birthed a new self, not by escaping his darkness, but by holding it close until it transformed. This is the path of individuation, to descend, dissolve, and be reborn not as someone else, but as someone whole. In therapy, in art, in spiritual seeking, this descent echoes. Many of us, without knowing, are living fragments of the Red Book. When anxiety grips us without name, when old wounds resurface in dreams, when we are drawn to irrational symbols and hidden fears, this is the voice of the unconscious, inviting us down. But we must not descend unaccompanied by intention. As Jung had for Lehman, his inner wise guide, we too must cultivate awareness, ritual, grounding. Because what we meet in the depths is not just pain, it is potential. The demon becomes daimon, the fire becomes forge. To face the inner hell is not madness, it is maturity. It is how we stop fearing ourselves, and in doing so, become capable of holding the fullness of what it means to be human. And so, Jung's descent was not retreat, it was return. A return to the soul, unmasked and luminous in the dark. William Blake did not fear hell, he listened to it. In The Marriage of Heaven and Hell, Blake turned theology upside down. He claimed that evil, as defined by organized religion, was not demonic perversion, but unrestrained energy, the raw libido of the soul. And what the Church condemned as sin, Blake often saw as the spark of divine imagination. To him, heaven and hell are not moral opposites, but psychological polarities. One is form, the other fire. One restrains, the other ignites. In this view, hell is not where sinners go, it's where the soul burns brightest when repressed. This is where psychology joins hands with poetry. Freud called it the unconscious. Jung called it the shadow. Blake called it the furnace of inspiration. All three recognized one thing: repression creates distortion. When libido, the core life force, is denied, it twists. It becomes shame, anxiety, even madness. But if met with awareness, this same energy becomes the fuel for art, love, spiritual depth. The devil, then, is not the enemy, it is the disowned force of becoming. Blake invites us to dance in the fire without being consumed, to see our sins not as curses, but as symbols of vitality misunderstood. He writes, "You never know what is enough unless you know what is more than enough." That is the logic of the soul. It grows through excess, not moderation. In this vision, salvation is not obedience, it is integration. Just as Jung taught, individuation requires us to reclaim the rejected parts of the psyche, to marry heaven and hell within. For only then does the full self emerge, not moral, but whole. To repress your desire is to shrink your soul. To redeem it is to create. Blake understood this, and through him, we remember, hell is not the opposite of heaven, it is its hidden twin. And without it, no soul can burn bright enough to become light. Hell is not a myth we outgrow, it is a metaphor we live through. Not a fiery pit beneath our feet, but a descent into the unknown terrain of the self where dreams die, identities dissolve, and every familiar anchor is burned away. We all, at some point, awaken in a forest dark, as Dante once did, realizing we have strayed from the straight path without knowing how. That moment of despair, confusion, and unraveling is not the end. It is an invitation, for what we call hell, often the beginning of something holy. Jung saw this clearly. To him, the underworld was not damnation, but transformation in disguise. Depression, anxiety, burnout, heartbreak, these are not merely clinical issues. They are calls from the unconscious, signals that something vital is missing, silenced, or waiting to be reborn. Psychology speaks of integration, spirituality speaks of redemption. But both agree on this: you cannot heal what you refuse to face. To journey through your inner hell is to meet the parts of you that have long been exiled, your rage, your grief, your unfulfilled longings. And yet, in the very flames that once terrified you, there lies a hidden grace. The devil, as Jung reminds us, is not always an enemy. Sometimes, he is the gatekeeper of your next becoming. When you dare to descend, to let go of the masks, the roles, the ego, you find something ancient and true waiting beneath the ruins. The self, not the version sculpted by approval or shame, but the one that has endured, quietly, through every collapse. This is not an easy path, but it is a real one. And perhaps that is the paradox of all inner growth. We must first break to become whole. So, if you find yourself in darkness, don't run. Sit with it. Speak to it. Ask what it came to teach. Because only by walking through your own hell can you emerge with the eyes to see heaven, not as a place you arrive at, but as a light you carry within. Thank you for being here.